Well, howdy ho there, fellow sojourners, and welcome back to another edition of Appropriate in the Culture. On today's episode, we discuss California's proposed reparations and whether or not there are biblical grounds for generational accountability. I'm Pastor Shane, I'll be your advisory committee today as we appropriate some culture. So reparation talk is all the rage these days in the Golden State, according to CNN. A committee in San Francisco has released an extensive proposal for reparations that includes a one-time payment of $5 million to each eligible black resident. To be eligible for reparations, San Francisco residents must be 18 years or older, have been identifying as black or African American on public documents for at least 10 years, and meet 2 of 8 additional criteria, including having been born or migrating to the city between 1940 and 1996, as well as showing proof of at least 13 years of residency, having been incarcerated by the failed war on drugs, or being the direct descendant of someone who was. Basically, if you're a convicted drug dealer, you might be eligible for $5 million. Usually criminal activity makes you ineligible for things, but not in San Francisco. And it's not just San Francisco, but the entire state, as Governor Lizardperson created a task force on reparations so that people who never owned slaves will pay people who never were slaves in a state that never had slavery with money they don't have. According to the Associated Press, quote, the leader of California's first-in-the-nation reparations task force on Wednesday said it won't take a stance on how much the state should compensate black residents whom economists estimate may be owed more than $800 billion for decades of over-policing, disproportionate incarceration, and housing discrimination. The $800 billion is more than 2.5 times California's $300 billion annual budget and does not include a recommended $1 million per older black resident for health disparities that have shortened their average lifespan. Not only is that fiscally insane, but quantifying who qualifies for reparations is equally problematic, as race baiter Angela Davis found out the hard way regarding her ancestry.
No, I can't believe this. No, my ancestors did not come here on the Mayflower.
Your ancestors came on the Mayflower.
No.
You are descended from one of the 101 people who sailed on the Mayflower.
Oof. That's a little bit too much to deal with right now.
Although Ms. Davis might hate being mixed up with whites, it is the greatness of America that we are a melting pot. Over generations, we all get mixed up together, and so separating us into some binary of oppressed and oppressor is historically illiterate and overly simplistic. And to make matters even more muddled, the historical injustices that California is seeking to make amends for are selectively applied. Because really, if you look at the history of California, the most blatant and horrendous discriminatory policies were enacted against Asians, particularly in San Francisco. Here's a smattering of examples from Wikipedia. In 1866, a residential ordinance passed by the city of San Francisco required all Chinese inhabitants to live in one area of the city. I wonder what area of the city. In 1890, the city of San Francisco once again ordered all Chinese inhabitants to move into a certain area of the city within 6 months or face imprisonment. In 1891, a residential statute required all Chinese to carry with them at all times a certificate of residence. Without it, a Chinese immigrant could be arrested and jailed. In 1879, the state constitution stipulated that no native of China would ever have the right to vote in the state of California. That was repealed in 1926. In 1913, a property statute known as the Alien Land Laws prohibited Asian Americans from owning or leasing property. The California Supreme Court struck that down in 1952. In 1931, a state code prohibited marriages between persons of the Caucasian descent and Asian races. So if black Americans were not uniquely discriminated against in California, why then should they be uniquely compensated? And what's more, the compensation is being applied to things that are not demonstrably unjust. Reparations over over-policing? What is over-policing? Who determined what was the right amount of policing? And how did they come to that determination? How do you quantify the amount of policing? Or reparations for disproportionate incarceration. Not wrongful incarceration, just disproportionate. The huge problem with that, of course, is that it assumes that all ethnic groups are equally committing the same amount of crimes. But that's not true. As Larry Elder has repeatedly hammered home, quote, The National Crime Victimization Survey questions victims of crimes whether or not the criminal was captured as to the race and ethnicity of the suspect. It turns out that the race of the arrested matches the percentage given by victims. So unless victims are lying about the race of their assailant, unconcerned about whether he gets caught, blacks are not being over-arrested. And that also is reflected in every single data metric that we have from the Department of Justice criminal statistics and the FBI statistics. The plain reason that Black Americans are disproportionately incarcerated is because Black Americans are disproportionately committing crimes. And the further demonstration of that beyond the statistics is that it doesn't equally apply to other historically marginalized people. If the disproportionate incarceration was due to racism or white supremacy or institutional racism, then why aren't Asian Americans disproportionately incarcerated? So California's proposal here is fiscally irresponsible, it's logistically challenging, and it's selectively applied. But is it moral? Now, there is a clear biblical teaching, which is that you are responsible and guilty for your own sins, not somebody else's. It says in Deuteronomy, "Parents are not to be put to death for their children, nor children put to death for their parents. Each will die for their own sin." And the same exact concept is restated in Ezekiel. "The one who sins is the one who will die. The child will not share the guilt of the parent, nor will the parent share the guilt of the child. The righteousness of the righteous will be credited to them, and the wickedness of the wicked will be charged against them." If we're not responsible for the sins of our parents, then we're certainly not responsible for the sins of the great-great-great-grandparents. But that doesn't mean that our sin doesn't have generational effects, and that's not the totality of Scripture. So, for instance, in the book of Joshua, a man named Achan disobeyed the direct commands of God. He stole what was meant to go to God, and because of that, God's blessing over the nation is removed, and they go out and they lose a battle. And then this happens. "Then Joshua said to Achan, 'My son, give glory to the Lord, the God of Israel, and honor him. Tell me what you have done. Do not hide it from me.' Achan replied, 'It is true. I have sinned against the Lord, the God of Israel. This is what I have done. When I saw in the plunder a beautiful robe from Babylonia, 200 shekels of silver, and a bar of gold weighing 50 shekels, I coveted them and took them. They are hidden in the ground inside my tent with the silver underneath.' So Joshua sent messengers, and they ran to the tent, and there it was, hidden in his tent, with the silver underneath. They took the things from the tent, brought them to Joshua and all the Israelites, and spread them out before the Lord. Then Joshua, together with all Israel, took Achan, son of Zerah, the silver, the robe, the gold bar, his sons and daughters, his cattle, donkeys, and sheep, his tent, and all that he had to the valley of Achor. Joshua said, 'Why have you brought this trouble on us? The Lord will bring trouble on you today.' Then all Israel stoned him, and after they had stoned the rest, they burned them. Over Achan they heaped up a large pile of rocks, which remains to this day. Then the Lord turned from his fierce anger, therefore that place has been called the Valley of Achor ever since." So because of his sin, they stone him and his whole family and his animals. Now maybe you could say that Achan's family knew about his sin or went along with it. I doubt it, but maybe. But either way, what's clear from the account is that the effects of Achan's sin wasn't relegated to just him. It harmed his family, it harmed his community, it harmed his nation. And that's true. We can privatize sin too much and think that it's just a personal issue, but it's not. Sin has externalities. It affects other people, and that effect can be generational. If you sin, let's say you commit adultery, well, that obviously harms your family. Adultery often leads to divorce, and kids whose parents are divorced are substantially more likely to engage in risky behavior and are more likely to be incarcerated for committing a crime. And if you're incarcerated as a juvenile, you're far more likely than the general population to be incarcerated as an adult. And if you're a child with a parent who is incarcerated, you are, according to some statistics, 6 times more likely to become incarcerated yourself. And on it goes, generationally. Now, obviously, people are not statistics. They have volition, they have a will, and they are responsible for their choices. And so that's what the Bible essentially argues. You are responsible for your choices, and you will be judged based on what you did or didn't do. But there are still externalities to sin. Sin has a broader ranging consequence, and some of those repercussions are generational. So is there something to say for making amends in order to repair some of the generational repercussions? We have this account in 2 Samuel. During the reign of David, there was a famine for 3 successive years. So David sought the face of the Lord. The Lord said, "It is on account of Saul and his blood-stained house. It is because he put the Gibeonites to death." The king summoned the Gibeonites and spoke to them. Now, the Gibeonites were not a part of Israel, but were survivors of the Amorites. The Israelites had sworn to spare them, but Saul, in his zeal for Israel and Judah, had tried to annihilate them. David asked the Gibeonites, "What shall I do for you? How shall I make atonement so that you will bless the Lord's inheritance?" The Gibeonites answered him, "We have no right to demand silver or gold from Saul or his family, nor do we have the right to put anyone in Israel to death." "What do you want me to do for you?" David asked. They answered the king, "As for the man who destroyed us and plotted against us so that we have been decimated and have no place anywhere in Israel, let 7 of his male descendants be given to us to be killed and their bodies exposed before the Lord at Gibeah of Saul, the Lord's chosen one." So the king said, "I will give them to you." And that's what happens. So again, we have the sin of one man harming his family, his community, and harming his nation. And you could argue what transpired there was a form of reparations. So should Christians be in favor of these reparations? Well, in principle, I don't think there's anything wrong with reparations. The Jews received reparations after the Holocaust, Japanese Americans received reparations after internment, and enslaved Americans also received reparations, right? 40 acres and a mule, that was an attempt at that. Affirmative action was also a form of reparation. And so here's the thing. As financially insane as it is, as problematic as it would be to apply, and as historically dubious as it is, I would still be in favor of California's reparation plan if I thought for a single second that it would actually bring healing. If that was actually the end of it, that's it, it's paid, done, no more hostility, no more antagonism, no more complaining about historical atrocities, turn the page, it's done, then I would be in favor of it. But that is no way, shape, or form what would happen. And that's admitted by the people making the reparations proposal. According to the economists advising the task force, it should be communicated to the public that the substantial initial down payment is the beginning of a conversation about historical injustices, not the end of it. Can you imagine if the Gibeonites went to David and were like, "Yeah, killing 7 descendants of Saul is a good down payment. It's the beginning of a conversation, but we're going to need a little more." I think David would have responded by killing them all. So what California is proposing is financially crazy, ahistorical, logistically questionable, and will not make amends. No is the best and proper response to that proposal. And there's no Christian or biblical basis to support it. So the best way forward to mitigate against the repercussions of historical sins is personal accountability. You have a will. You have volition. You are responsible for your choices. You are not a statistic. And Black Americans all throughout the nation have ascended to the highest levels of our society. Historical sins didn't prevent a Black president, or Black Supreme Court justices, or Black CEOs, or Black athletes, or Black musicians, or Black artists, or Black entertainers, or Black academics. There is no field, no vocation, no office, no economic status that Black Americans have not attained in this country. Historical injustice does not necessitate personal injustice. And the way forward is to embrace the fact that the righteousness of the righteous will be credited to them, and the wickedness of the wicked will be charged against them. Sin has repercussions, but you are responsible for you. All right, that'll do for today. As always, if you like what we're doing here, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, join my author's Facebook page, follow me on the various socials, rate, review, give 5 stars, and I'll see you next week for more Appropriating the Culture.